Last week we looked at Joseph and Joseph. Joseph, um, who was the father of Jesus, and Joseph of Arimathea, who requested the body of Jesus, was a member of the council, and he, along with Nicodemus, took the body of Jesus, put it in his tomb, and so forth. Today we're going to talk about Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Those three kind of move together. We probably won't finish completely talking about all three of those, but I wanted to kind of bunch them together because they are brothers and sisters. Luke chapter 10 and John chapter 11 and 12 are three times when you have an interaction with Mary, Martha, and Jesus. We're talking about people who have some kind of connection to Jesus, and of course, those two Josephs did very much so. But Mary and Martha and Lazarus evidently had a real connection. They must have been, according to what we see in Scripture and the way things moved as Scripture moves through these relationships, they must have been close friends, and it seems that they would have had a connection that would have been deeper than others, because maybe this is a place where Jesus would come from time to time, not really having a place to just go and actually have a real place to stay, a real bed and a real hot meal and those kinds of things. But we see it seems that Mary and Martha and Lazarus provided that for him as he would go by and visit with them, and they became friends of Jesus. We kind of are introduced to that fact of his being close to them when Lazarus is sick. You remember that story. We're going to get to that one in John chapter 11, but we'll get to that one in a little while. So Mary and Martha obviously belong together, and I think that Lazarus puts them in there, could be put in there with them as well. And it seems that these two are found together regularly as Jesus interacts with them, and we're going to look at those times. Jesus places Martha first, though your expositors usually put Mary first, but he places Martha first. They lived in Bethany, and it seems that this must have, it may be a little bit cloudy as to exactly what this means, but the text says that Martha welcomed him into her house. Now, is it Martha and Mary's house, or is it Martha's house? It sounds a lot like this would be Martha's house. But they were in Bethany, in a village about a mile east of what we know as the Mount of Olives. And it may have been a very familiar place to Jesus. As a matter of fact, I'm going to just say it outright that it was very likely a very favorite place of Jesus to go and to visit with Martha and Mary and Lazarus. So let's look at Luke 10 and 38 beginning, and this is the first account we have of Mary and Martha, and this one's familiar to you. It's one of those passages that is referred to a lot. It's preached on a lot. It's taught on a lot. It is relevant, and I think that's one of the reasons that we hear it a lot, because it is very relevant. Verse 38 beginning of Luke chapter 10. Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, But one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion which will not be taken away from her. So the setting is familiar to you as Jesus is welcomed into the house. It says Martha welcomed him into her house, verse 29. Then it says that she had a sister named Mary. Mary sat at the Lord's feet and listened to the Lord's teaching. It insinuates that Mary didn't. Now, whether she did for a while and then got up and started serving, we don't know the facts that happened before this time, but what we do know is that Martha was distracted. That's verse 40. Martha was distracted, and the thing that was on her mind was serving. When I read that, one of the things that kind of comes to my mind is I've got to get some food prepared. I've got to get things ready. I've got to do these things to get the meal prepared because we have a group that's come in, and I wasn't expecting this crowd. How many women would have to do that? You're going to jump in and try to get things together. And Mary sits at the Lord's feet and listens to his teaching. Martha is up doing whatever is necessary. It says serving, and whether she was doing that as we think of serving sometimes, where you're walking around helping people get their snacks or drinks or whatever, but it sounds to me like she was preparing for what was upcoming. So she goes to the Lord and she says, Lord, do you not care that my sister Mary has left me to serve all by myself? Tell her to help me. I don't know what kind of relationship Martha had with Jesus, but those are pretty bold words, aren't they? First of all, I'm not sure exactly how "don't you care" in English communicates in Greek and how that would sound when Mary said that to Jesus, but it's pretty, what would you call it? Bold? Yeah. Don't you care? Pointed, yeah. Curt. It's kind of cutting, isn't it? A little bit cutting. And then she gives Jesus an order. Tell her. We're not going to do any present day application, Andy. He's pointing. We're not going to do any present day application. So the two things that happen that really strike me as being odd, she goes to Jesus and says, "Don't you care?" And again, I'm not sure how that translates when you put that in Greek, when you put it back in Greek, and I'm not sure about that. But in our reading it in the English, that is pretty bold and straightforward. It may be a little cutting, as Michael says. And then the next thing is, tell her to help me. So Martha, it doesn't tell us, but Martha may very well be the older sister. That sounds like the way an older sister would behave, doesn't it? That kind of the character of the older sister. Since Lazarus is always last, I don't know if he is the youngest. That may be the case there as well. But anyway, we're dealing with things that we're not really sure of, but that does stand to be a real possibility. So here's the thing. Let's look at Martha from a positive light. When you look at Martha, one of the things that she obviously had was the gift of hospitality. That was the thing that she was about. She was about doing that. She wanted to provide a meal. I'm going to go that direction because I really think that's what she was doing. She's going to provide a meal. She's going to get together whatever she has that she can put together at the spur of the moment, because we've got these folks that came by and they didn't call and tell me they were coming. Well, think about that one for a minute. You've got travelers that it used to happen to us all the time when I was growing up. My kinfolks from Florida would just show up. They may give us a day's notice, but usually they'll just show up. Hey, we came up to visit so-and-so in Double Springs. We thought we'd come by and visit y'all for a day or two. So there you go, throwing pallets on the floor. My mama was a Martha. She was doing hospitality stuff. So we had, 7 kids on pallets on the floor. Kids nowadays don't know what a pallet is, but you just throw down a bunch of quilts and everybody just goes to sleep. And now everybody got to have a bed for some reason. I don't know. So Martha had the gift of hospitality. She was going about doing that which she believed to be important. And obviously, I think she felt like she was good at that. That's something that she was good at. Oh, exactly. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, John's statement about the culture of that time, you were obligated by the culture to be hospitable, and part of that was to feed somebody that just dropped by. If they dropped, you remember the guy who knocks on his neighbor's door wanting bread because he had unexpected guests? That's the idea. Martha's dealing with that stress and dealing with that pressure of needing to get something together. The observation made that she would be looked down upon if she didn't provide that. Now, I think you take exception to this because of who you have in your presence. Maybe you sit down and you listen, and maybe there's this point where Jesus turns to you and says, Martha, Martha, would you supply me some bread? I don't know. But one of the things that is very obvious is that she's concerned about this idea of hospitality. Since it says in the very first verse that we read in verse 38 that Martha welcomed him into her house, that puts a little more obligation on her to be the one that provides this, because she's the owner or the head of the household, it sounds like, and as head of the household, then she's obligated to provide that. So that puts, not only is she from the woman's perspective, but she's looking at it from, or maybe looking at it from the perspective of being the head of this household. Where her husband is, or did she have one, or exactly what's happened, again, we don't have a clue about her life from that perspective. So from any direction you look at it, one of the things that's true about Martha is that she is hospitable. Now, in Luke chapter 10, verse 39, there is the introduction to her sister Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. Do you have another translation that includes both of them at his feet? I think there may be at least one translation that maybe instead of Mary, it says they or something like that. There is some controversy about whether that's Lazarus and Mary or who that might be. Yes. Also, okay, that's it. Okay, switch also. So there's some hint that there were others listening, or maybe that was talking about Mary. We're not Martha. We're not sure about that, but what we do know is that Mary sat at Jesus' feet. This word also may suggest that Martha did, at least for a little while, but the idea that Mary sat at Jesus' feet communicates a lot about who Mary is, because I don't know what her understanding was of who Jesus is. I don't have a clue about Martha and Mary's perception of who the man Jesus is and who he might be other than their friend. We don't have a clue right here. Now, later on, when we get to John chapter 11, we're going to have a little different perspective, because they're both going to say if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. So there's something that they know. But right here, we don't know what they know. But it does seem that if they had any inkling of an idea that Jesus was something special, a prophet from God or anything like that, that Martha is going to join Mary in this sitting at Jesus' feet and learning from Jesus. But she didn't, but Mary at least did. So Martha is distracted. Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. Martha comes to Jesus with stern words and a command, and then you have the answer of Jesus. The answer is, you can't misunderstand it, because he says in verse 41 and 42, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. So basically, what Jesus says is, Martha, you need to calm down. You need to be less full of anxiety and troubled about this idea of providing for your guests. And you need to be like Mary and be aware of what is in front of you. That phrase, Mary has chosen the good portion, that's quite an interesting phrase. And when you chase that back all the way, it gives you the idea of making the best choice when you've got things laid out. Okay, here's a good way. It's been 100 years since I've been to a buffet. The last one I went to was Western Sizzling, I think. That may not be the name of it. Yeah. Okay, so the one where you go back and they cook your steaks in the window back there, you can watch them cook the steaks. Is that Western Sizzling? I'm not sure, but anyway, so you got all this other meat, and then you can go to the window, and they're cooking the steak back there, and you can point at which one you want them to cook. You can point at it, and so you step up to the window. It's got glass there, and the fire's going back there, and you point at that porterhouse right there, expensive cut of steak. And you know what the guy does, right? He slices it into 3 pieces and gives you one of the little pieces. But what you do at that window is you choose the good portion. You choose the best cut of meat. You find the one you want, and you choose that which is the best, or which to you looks the best, and the guy takes it and he puts it on the grill, and he probably cooks it slap to death, but it's still there. So that's kind of what we're talking about. When you have 2 choices in front of you, which one are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to avoid sitting at the feet of Jesus when Jesus is here, or are you going to be like Mary and choose that which is the best option? Choose the best option. All right, before we move to the next interaction with Jesus and Martha and Mary, do you have observations? Anything you'd like to say or ask questions about what's going on here in Luke chapter 10? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I think sometimes we miss part of the issue here. I think that Jesus doesn't chastise her as much for being about this duty as he does about her attitude toward it. And she showed that attitude when she came to Jesus and she said what she said. So she really showed that attitude. So I think when Jesus chastises her here, he says, Martha, Martha, don't be anxious. Don't be troubled. You've got to calm down. You can't be all up in the air about this thing that's going on. Little chastisement about, he said, Mary's chosen the good portion. Leave Mary alone. If you want to go about what you're doing, then do that. Good observation. That Martha what? Yes, she did. I never really heard it put that way. But Nelson says it's interesting that Martha would question the compassion of Jesus. Don't you care? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I wonder. Did she not? I don't know how much she understood here. Now, when we're going to John chapter 11 now, and when we get there, she it's pretty clear they have a little bit of an understanding when we get there. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, when you want to make application with a passage paragraph like this, Tommy brings out the fact that it's pretty clear that the application for us is we need to sit down and figure out what the best portion is, the best choice. All right, let's go to John chapter 11. Of course, you probably recognize John 11 as being the chapter which is about the death and the resurrection of Lazarus. Quite an extensive reading, and we're not going to read all of it because we're really just talking about Mary and Martha and, of course, Lazarus, but we're going to get to Lazarus here in shortly if time allows. If not, we'll pick up there next week. But Mary and Martha send a message to Jesus that their brother is sick and that they need him to come. Now, that tells me that there is a trust and an understanding that there's something special about him, that their statement when he arrives, let's see if I can find that. Yes, verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So there's some understanding that Jesus is a miracle worker, some understanding that he has something special about him. So here you have Martha and Mary who send for Jesus, and he doesn't come immediately. The explanation is there in the first portion of the chapter in verses 1 through 16, and then we'll pick up in verse 17 where Jesus finally comes into Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus live. So let's pick up in verse 17. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Verse 24. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, The teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in a place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep there. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and greatly troubled, and he said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? A few more that refer to the girls here, just a couple more verses. Verse 38, Jesus is deeply moved again as he comes to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." All right, that gives us all the information on Mary and Martha there as Jesus comes into Bethany. Upon learning of the sickness, but not coming immediately, waiting till he is dead so that he can raise him from the dead, it seems. So let's look at what takes place here. Martha is the first to come out and go see Jesus. Their brother was sick and he died, and the language is a language of faith. There's no doubt about that. If you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. And there's this concept that she has about the resurrection. I know he's going to live again. I know something about that. I believe in that. So this communication with Jesus is a language of faith. There's no doubt in that communication. There was an understanding of somewhat about who Jesus is, because we see what she says about him. If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. And then at the very end of that statement, she says, let's see, verse... She said to him, verse 27, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." So there you have the statement made. And this whole interaction that Jesus has with Martha, I believe, is a language that Martha is using that is full of faith. It communicates her belief. It communicates so many things about who Martha is. So Martha then leaves Jesus and tells Mary that she needs to go see Jesus. And so in verses 28 and following, actually through about 32, you have this meeting with Mary. It's very similar to Martha's interaction with Jesus. And as you look at what she says, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died, that same kind of idea. Let's see. She rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but he was still in the place where Martha had left him. When the Jews... let's see. Okay. But now, 32. Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus heard her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her still also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and greatly troubled, and he said, "Where have you laid him?" So Mary's response is more worshipful. She falls at his feet. But she also says, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died." She falls at Jesus' feet weeping. And then the last thing we hear from these two sisters is when Jesus says, "Open the tomb," and Martha interjects, "He's been dead 4 days, so surely there will be an odor." The King James is my favorite. "Surely he stinketh." Yeah. All right, so when you look at this interaction with Mary and Martha with Jesus, what are some things that stand out to you when you look at these two ladies and these two women and the way that they both come out to meet Jesus? You can go all the way back to the very first verses when they called for Jesus to come because Lazarus is sick, if you'd like. So what do you learn about them from this interaction? Yes. Yeah, one of the things that we're sure of, and Nelson says this, that they firmly believed that he could be healed by Jesus. We don't know what the sickness was. We have no idea. And had they witnessed Jesus healing the sick before? We're not sure, but they were confident that he could heal. What else stands out to you? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Isn't it interesting? Yeah, isn't it interesting that we have three expressions from Martha, and they're all accusative of Jesus up to this point. Yeah, yeah. You may be right. John's observation is that though that both of them, when they speak to Jesus, their first words seem to be, "If you'd been here, he wouldn't have died." Is that accusatory? Is that kind of is that kind of a little bit bold to speak to the one that Martha says is the Son of God? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think this statement is again a statement of faith that we believe in you, and we believe that if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. But now that you're here, we're really unsure what to do exactly. So Jesus pushes it into who you believe I am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's a good observation though, because it does kind of come across that way that they're asking for something to be done, especially Martha. Martha there in the beginning. Right. Mm-hmm. No. Yeah. Yeah. And so they had no clue what Jesus' intention was, and as you said, his intention was to raise him from the dead, and that was going to be even more miraculous than him healing from the sick. Nelson had a comment over here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's the way I believe it as well. That it wasn't really accusatory; it was a statement of faith. That we believe in you, Jesus. We believe if you'd been here, you could have healed him. Uh, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good observation. The thing that we all miss sometimes, and this is I think kind of the point of what Jesus is trying to make in all of this is I could heal him from where I am. I don't have to go to Bethany. And mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting wording, an interesting series of events, but it seems that the words of Jesus are what raised him and brought him out from my perspective and everything that I could see. When he said, "Lazarus, come forth," Lazarus gets up and walks out. But was it at the moment when he prays, or when he used the words come out? I don't know. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. Yeah. That's been the question of the ages, Linda. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, yeah. Linda's question about why did Jesus weep? Um, there's that's been answered in a lot of different ways. Was he weeping for Lazarus, the death of his friend? Was he weeping because sin was causing all this suffering of death? Was he weeping because of the unbelief of the Jews? The bottom line is, when it comes right down to it, when we're looking at Martha and Mary, the example that was given to them about his power would have been super overwhelming for them. Because think about their greeting of Jesus when he comes into Bethany, and they are grieving the death of their brother. And Jesus just moves right in, moves straight to the tomb, and raises him from the dead. And that would have been impactful in so many different ways on Mary and Martha. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, we we know exactly about what part of it was like. He was a hunted man, and he was hunted. And we're going to talk about Lazarus last week, and we've talked about a lot about him being raised from the dead and all that tonight. But our time won't allow us to get into Lazarus. But let me just close out this idea of Mary and Martha and this scene at the tomb by looking at the fact that um, when you get to chapter 12, verses 1 through 7, this is the last interaction that we know of, at least that is recorded, between Mary and Martha. This is the third event. So you have the event that's recorded when Jesus visits and Martha scolds Jesus. Uh, um, she's serving and Mary's at Jesus' feet. And then Jesus, okay, all right, we're done. Lazarus next week.